So if you've been around the Facebook advertising space for any amount of time, you've probably heard that broad targeting is the new thing, but you also know interest targeting is still obviously there and it makes sense to use. And is that still best or is broad targeting better, right? So in this video, I want to break down interest targeting versus broad targeting, compare and contrast the two, and ultimately tell you which one is the best. Now, if you're new to the channel, my name is Blake. I run a digital advertising agency called Jet Ads. We've generated tens of millions of dollars for our clients in e-commerce, lead generation, SaaS. So very qualified to speak on this. We've run a ton of broad targeting as well as interest targeting over the last 4+ years in multiple different industries. And so have a lot of data points to talk about this and kind of explain really what the difference is between each and where and when you're going to get better results with either. All right, so let's jump in. Now, when we're talking about interest targeting versus broad targeting, broad has really become super popular. Now, why is that? And it's because ultimately Facebook's AI is better than it's ever been. Well, maybe not better than back when, the Pixel and like iOS 14 wasn't in the picture, but Facebook has really gotten pretty targeted and great with their AI in order to optimize for whatever you're targeting for. So if you're optimizing for purchases and you tell Facebook, hey, I want purchases, I want sales by selecting that campaign objective, and you don't give it any interest to target, Facebook is a lot of the time going to go out there and know, okay, this person wants purchases. I'm going to find people that get purchases. And so that's the real difference there. So when Facebook, we're talking about, broad targeting right here. So let's just start with this, right? So if we're talking about broad targeting right here, Facebook's going to use its entire pool of people to find your customer. Now, again, if you select sales or leads, Facebook knows what types of people on their Facebook ad platform typically submit leads, typically generate sales. And Facebook is also going to know, based on your own website, based on the information in the ad that you provide in the creative, what type of product you're selling. And so that's why people advocate for broad a lot of the time, is because you don't necessarily need to tell Facebook anymore, hey, this is what my customer looks like. Facebook is using its AI to kind of crawl your website and your ads and understand basically who you're going after. And so again, if you want sales and you're, selling a dog collar, to people with dogs, Facebook's already going to know, hey, this person is selling to dogs, people who own dogs and who buy dog products. And so it's going to go after people that are, purchasers. And within that, if we zoom in on this, it's going to go after people that own dogs already. Now, where broad targeting can fail a little bit, especially, is when your pixel is very fresh and you don't have a lot of data. And so when Facebook doesn't have a lot of data, it kind of struggles off the bat to know who exactly is your target audience. And so if you have no data points, Facebook's really going to start out very broad right here with, general kind of dogs. And it's just going to find a bunch of people and test over here and just do a bunch of things. And it's going to kind of learn really slowly, versus if we go here for interest targeting, the only difference is we're setting up the campaign in the exact same way. We're going to have our sales campaign targeting. We're going to have optimization for purchase. However, we're going to point it in the right direction using an interest. And so if we have an interest right here, what we can do is go into the actual campaign right here. And then right off the bat, we can select a small subsegments right here using, in this case, we're using dogs. And then it will try to stay in the parameters of this interest that we select. However, the thing with Facebook now is when you select an interest, it clearly says on Facebook ads. So for example, if you go into here and you go to Advantage Plus on, right, I think they're making the setting just default to be on, and then you add an interest, it literally says right here, we'll automatically reach people beyond these settings when it's likely to improve performance. So in a sense now, even adding an interest, in the detailed targeting section, the campaign is still kind of broad. And so there's not a lot of like separation anymore, whereas it used to be you add an interest, it will only target people within that interest. Everything now to some degree is broad. However, it's still, again, recommended, especially for newer brands, to go ahead and add in your actual interest just to give Facebook the best starting place to know who your ideal customer is, right? And so that's how we find using interest is the best. And to be honest, we always split test the two of them because ultimately you never know what's going to work best. In a lot of this more seasoned accounts, we do find that broad targeting works a lot better because it's just telling it, hey, go out and find the most purchases possible. It also scales a lot better, but at lower budget, interest works a lot better because you can add in smaller interest segments and just start Facebook off in the right place. So that's really the big difference there. And you can see in this ad account right here, we are actually primarily testing broad, but this campaign right here that we have, We actually are using a combination of a stack of many interests here, using musicians and bands that are popular. And so it's great if you're going after a specific persona. You can go ahead and target that kind of unique persona. Or if all you care about is purchases and you don't really care where they're coming from, even if you have a kind of a unique angle with your ad, a lot of the time, if you populate that in, Facebook will kind of crawl that information and know who to go after. And based on who your ad is resonating with the most, your creative will kind of do the targeting itself. So again, that's why a lot of the tests that we're doing are broad, and why so many people are recommending broad, because in a sense, everything is now kind of broad, and most of the work that's happening is at the ad level, and then Facebook is using that data to go out and find your customer, regardless if the ad angle is different, regardless if things are different. Okay, and so one of the only times that I would recommend that you go ahead and test out different interests is if you have kind of multiple different customers that are very different that all get attributed in your pixel. So for example, if you are a B2B customer and you sell to your ideal customer, which is, let's say, like a brand owner of a particular type of business, but then you also sell to agency owners, and that's a completely different funnel, that's a completely different offer, completely different kind of demographic, then you would want to kind of separate out into different campaigns with different interests based on that, because you're going to have different conversion events and optimizing for different things. So Facebook's pixel will get a little bit confused if you have really drastically different customers that are all kind of optimizing for the same thing in the same campaign. So that's where interest can be really helpful. But otherwise, if you just kind of have one general customer that you're optimizing for and you have some existing data, I recommend testing out broad and kind of sticking with that if you find that it works. And it is just kind of like the best to kind of scale with as well. But yeah, the problem is you don't really know exactly where you're targeting, but you don't really know either when you're doing interest as well. Now, on that point as well, when you're using interest targeting, what I would recommend is to go ahead and populate in interests that are still quite broad. I wouldn't try to narrow in on your audience too much. So like if I go to here and then I search for dogs, you can see the audience is right now is quite broad. But if you go down to here, you can see there's just dogs, animals as an interest. And so Facebook has really like cut down on the total number of interests that are available that you can target. And so there's really just like these big overlying like interests that you can target, and versus these kind of small sub niches of interest that they used to have. And so there's typically just going to be one really big interest right here. You can see there's all these different movies and stuff like that. But if you're just looking to target dogs, I mean, that's the most obvious one. Then you also have pets, pet store, etc. Like you could do that, but now you're bringing in, like cats and other animals and things like that. Another is like dog training, dog toy, things like this, dog walking. There is like, quite a few other things right here. These are all kind of sub interests of this overarching dog interest. And so if you have a dog product, I would just recommend starting right with dogs. But if you offer a dog training service, see if you can find a really specific interest for that. And obviously it makes sense to test that right off the bat and leave that interest in there for a bit. Then you could potentially switch to broad and try targeting with that as well. If broad doesn't work for you, that's no problem. Just kind of stick with that same interest that always works for you. And there's no problem with that. Again, because of the audience targeting, it is still kind of broad. So if you need to scale that up, you do have the freedom to be able to do that. All right, and lastly, let's talk about lookalike audiences here quick. Now, what I would recommend for lookalikes is, again, what's happening right here is, say we have, we zoom in here, right? And let's say this is how many people we've gotten to buy from Facebook right here, okay? So we've gotten this many people to convert. We have a decent little size right here. I mean, that's still pretty big, but let's say, it's 1,000 customers or something like that we've gotten. I would say it's probably the best in lead gen to do that, because your audience is so small and narrow and there's not a lot of people that look like your customer. It's very important to get really targeted. And so that's where a lookalike audience of 1% for your existing customers or leads can come in really helpful. But for something like e-commerce, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to do a lead gen list. It doesn't really make sense to do a lookalike audience unless you have kind of a specific use case, like say you've generated, you're looking to generate leads. And so you have leads that ultimately convert in the back end based on a certain list, and you want to generate more leads that ultimately convert. That's where it could make sense to generate a lookalike audience for a lead gen that's going to lead to purchases, because Facebook's going to optimize for the cheapest leads, but it might not be the highest value leads that ultimately lead to sales. And so you can make a lookalike audience around the highest value leads, things like that. Stuff like that is useful. Even though you're paying maybe a higher cost per lead, those leads should be more valuable. That's another good way to use it. Well, with anything, I recommend testing it. If you do test, purchase lookalike audiences, you could see good results with that. But in general, Facebook knows where to go with your customers and who to best target to get the best results. So you don't need to try to really do all this media buying and all this complicated stuff to try to get the best cost per purchase. Just focus on what you can control, which is the creative ultimately, and just kind of leaving Facebook with the most open settings to try to get the best results. So that's pretty much the difference between all three as I see it. Again, recommend using broad, especially if you have more seasoned data. If you are going after a more narrow interest, kind of see if there's an interest that relates to your business, and you can definitely start with that. I recommend either way testing both. Regardless of your business size, to just kind of see. You'll probably fall on broad, and again, the line between broad and interest is kind of getting blurred. So again, these are more similar, and lookalikes, you can test those out as well. And if you are looking to do retargeting, that's still available, and you can still do retargeting, and that's kind of a separate topic. But yeah, as far as acquisition goes, that's kind of the thoughts and the segmentation there. Now, if you want more information on exactly how to run your Facebook ads or even Google ads or things like that, I have a ton of other videos on the channel, so check those out. And speaking of which, YouTube really thinks you're gonna like this next video, so I recommend checking that out next.